Hello and welcome to episode 265 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now you may have noticed it's been quite a long time since I put out my last episode. In fact, over 3 weeks. And in the world of Mark and Me, that's unheard of, and I don't think it's ever been that long between an episode in the 5 years that I've done this podcast. Well, there's some bad news. I wasn't very well. I had an extremely bad kidney stone, not 1, not 2, but 3, and they caused me a lot of internal bleeding, a lot of pain, and the doctors basically said you might die. So the good news is I'm not dead, but the bad news is I had to really take a step back, sleep a lot, rest a lot, be sensible, and genuinely rest, and that's something I've never done. But the good news is I'm now back with so many episodes to share with you, and my God, this is a great one to return with. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Comeau, the incredible musician, guitarist, keyboard player, and absolute genius from one of my favourite new bands, Crownlands. This band I just discovered out of nowhere, and you know when you just discover this band, and it's happened to me a few times in my life, where the moment you hear them, you want to then go and check out absolutely everything they've ever done. I was sitting on YouTube and this song came up called Lady of the Lake, and I genuinely thought it was an old Rush song or Led Zeppelin or something from the 70s. I could not believe this band were out there right now. But the performance that I saw blew my mind. I saw this guitarist with this amazing beard playing the guitar. He was using a keyboard with his feet. The drummer was singing, and I couldn't believe it was a two-piece. It reminded me a bit of like Royal Blood, and I was like, this is unreal that only 2 people are making this much noise. But this is on another level to anything that I've heard. And I think, apart from Sleep Token this year, no other band has got my attention like these guys. And if you go and check out their brand new album, Fearless, it will blow your mind. They are fucking awesome. And I really hope by the end of today's episode, you're on board like me and you get obsessed and check out everything that Crownlands have done, because they are unbelievable. But, as always, just before I get to that interview, let's touch base and talk about my last episode. It was a long time ago, over 3 weeks, but I was joined by the amazing singer and songwriter Rushton Kelly. And do you know what? The response was amazing. Thank you so much. It was one of my most downloaded episodes this year, and I couldn't be happier with the response. Thank you so much as well to Rushton for sharing that episode, because that really, really helped. And I've seen a lot of new listeners jump on board, so thank you. But today, it's all about Crownlands. Honestly, this band have absorbed me. I haven't stopped listening to them. I'm telling all my mates to listen to them, and they're all absolutely loving it. So I think we should get to the interview. But just before we get to the episode, let's give a big shout out to the sponsors of Mark and Me, the amazing Richer Sounds. Thanks to those guys, each and every month, they carry on supporting me and allow me to honestly go out there and host this podcast on all these different sites, get loads of stuff done, and without them, I wouldn't be here. So thank you. And if you're in the market for a TV, I say this every time, they are the best out there. So head over to richersounds.com. There's one more thing to do now, and it's to get to this interview, and I can't wait to share it with you. Here's me and Kevin from the amazing Crownlands talking all things music. So Kevin, thanks for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kevin, what I like to do for anyone that might be tuning in today and then discovering your music for the first ever time, they may have not been a fan of Crown Lands, and hopefully this podcast will convert them. But
Yeah,
I like to take it right back to the very start and tell me about when you were a kid, when you were growing up. What were those first albums that you remember buying that basically made you want to start being in a band or basically loving music?
yeah. What a great question, man. Like Confession, the very first record that really changed my life would have been Green Day's American Idiot, because I remember I was 11 years old and I heard their song Holiday on the radio. And of course, there's that legendary bass interlude in the bridge. And that was the first time I think it registered to me what a bass guitar was. And so I asked my dad, if I could get a bass for Christmas. And, he obliged. And he's an accomplished guitar player himself. And so he taught me how to play All Along the Watchtower, the
Oh,
Jimi
nice.
Hendrix version on
Bloody
bass.
hell.
Which again, it's basically just three chords on the bass, right? It's all the work happens on the guitar that makes that song truly magical, right? But just understanding the function of root notes and understanding um, the building blocks of music, and so obviously that just completely opened my eyes. And then my parents bought me a music book so I would learn how to read music at the same time. And so I was, learning how to play hot cross buns from reading music, and then I was getting into, psychedelic rock and punk rock through learning by ear. And so those kind of two streams of music has kind of led me to being the arranger in Crownlands, right? Because in this band now, I play bass guitar, lead guitar, keyboards, and basically pretty much any other instrument that can make melody or harmony. And so I have to use like basically all of my musical knowledge to arrange the music as well as I can, because obviously, even though we're a two piece, we're trying to do that kind of symphonic prog thing. And then as far as albums that I bought, the first records I bought on vinyl were probably Pink Floyd's Animals and Rush's Hemispheres.
Oh,
I
wow.
remember going to there was like this was before records really took off again.
Yeah.
Obviously now they've surpassed CDs back into like that's where, if you're selling physical music, people are buying records rather than CDs. But for a long time, the only way you could get records was in flea markets. And so I'd go like every weekend, every Sunday, I'd go to this local flea market and peruse the records. And these old guys kind of like they realized quickly like the sort of music I was into. And so, I remember buying a bunch of Floyd records and Rush records. And then these guys started turning me on to, weirder stuff like Yes, Genesis, King Crimson, Gentle Giant, Vandergraaf Generator. And then you just fall down the rabbit hole, right? And
That's some incredible foundations, and I'm just thinking now, imagine how much like money those vinyls will be worth right now in the market.
oh, I know. It's crazy. I mean, I remember I think I spent like $10 and I got the first pressing of Hemispheres on the red vinyl. And now it's like that's a basically a collector's item because it's so hard to find because it was only pressed in Canada for like the first year of production. And then, everything else now has shifted off into like black vinyl for like the rest of the pressings. But it's really interesting to see how, vinyl has come so far in such a short time. I feel like in just the last like 5, 10 years, we've seen such a resurgence in vinyl. And, you can't really go to a flea market and find a bunch of great records for $3 or $4 a piece anymore. It's looking at 30, $40 a record most of the time now, right? So
It's so strange. I've been trying to get like some of my old classic records that I absolutely adore on vinyl and stuff like Radiohead and stuff like that. And the
oh yeah,
prices now just to try and get them is like, what the fuck? Like, this is
I know.
insane. It's going to cost me like $100 to get like OK Computer for the first pressing. And I'm like, oh, damn it. Like, I'm never going to be able to do this.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Kid A and Amnesiac are only available on 10-inch vinyl, right? It's really, really hard to find those on 12-inch.
I think so, yeah. They're a nightmare to try and get their vinyl for. So I should have just gone for someone a bit more, easy and
No, that's
commercial
awesome.
right now. But I just
Yeah,
want those albums.
I know. You're a big Radiohead fan?
I adore them.
Me
I
too,
went to
man.
see The
Me too.
Smile only a few months ago in the UK, Tom York's
Nice.
side project, and I can't believe how good they are, and that's his side project. I'm like, oh man, like it's you can't have that much talent on your own with Radiohead, with the Smile. It's like, how do you have so much
Yeah.
going on?
I know Tom York's a genius, but also like you can't discount Johnny Greenwood, right?
Oh,
Because I think he contributes so much to the greatness of the Smile for sure, man, and to Radiohead. And I feel like that's very similar to like the role I feel like I play in Crownlands is like that kind of Johnny Greenwood or like Mike Rutherford from Genesis of being like the sideman or John Paul Jones from Zeppelin, you know, like that's always kind of been the sort of guys that I gravitated towards. Who I really loved were, you know, the guys that were like adding the textures and like um not, you know, not afraid to not necessarily be like the center of attention, but people who were contributing to like the overall greatness of the music. So that's why I
that's
love
why.
Johnny Greenwood, man.
Yeah,
And
like
Ed O'Brien.
yeah, I was gonna say unbelievable, and for me, George Harrison's always my favorite Beatle because
Yes.
you know
Yes.
he isn't the John Lennon, he isn't Paul McCartney, he's just there in the background most of the time, but doing everything. The stuff he contributes, if you could solo just his guitar work, it's unbelievable. But you never get it because he's always overshown by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, the duo. But he is the greatest.
I know it's also so important to realize that Paul and John, their greatness is because of their relationship. You know, on
Yeah.
their own, you know, I feel like they left to their own devices, they were never as strong as they were together. Whereas George didn't have anybody. He had to make everything that is, you know, everything that George did, especially like I'd say post Revolver, I guess, is at least as good, if not better, than anything Paul and John did. And he had to do that all on his own without any feedback from them. And I think that's like George is the best. Absolutely my favorite Beatle, man. Absolute magical person. That there's this amazing Scorsese documentary on George, and that just really that was that was one of the first things I remember seeing with my dad. It's like this 4 hour documentary. That was like what cemented George as my favorite Beatle. And actually, my fiance and I like we bonded big time over our love of George because he's not he's not usually everyone's go-to favorite Beatle, man. He's so good.
We're gonna get on,
There's
man.
actually,
We're gonna get on.
I
We're on
know,
the same page.
yeah, totally, man. Actually, this video just uh recently came up where Danny Harrison and Paul McCartney are in the studio and they're listening to like the master tapes of Abbey Road. And there's actually a guitar solo at the end of Here Comes the Sun that they like that's basically just been recently unearthed. And it's so good. And I just remember getting so emotional listening to that. I'm just like, it should have been in the original version. It's basically in like that 7/8 walk down with the orchestra and then
Yep.
just George doing his George thing, right? I highly recommend check that out, man. It's really special hearing.
You know, after this interview,
Uh,
that's the first thing I'm gonna do.
yeah, man, you got to check it out. It's so good.
I ask this to every band that comes on, but live music changed it for me, and it's weird you mentioned Green Day. Maybe I'm a bit older, but for me, it was Dookie. They were the
Yeah,
band that when I listened to that album, I couldn't believe that three musicians were making that much noise. And when I went to see them live, stuff like Basket Case and When I Come Around and Longview, I really hoped that it was going to be as good as the CD I had back at home. And when I got there, it was even better. And I couldn't believe it. It
yeah.
was like one of my first ever shows. It was intimate. It was a small venue. What was those first gigs that that you kind of went to and thought, fuck, like this is what I want to do?
Yeah, oh man, great question, man. Because yeah, live music is so special because I think for a lot of us, especially growing in up in the digital age, without good hi-fi systems in a house, a lot of the time you hear music, but you don't feel music, right? If you listen to music on a car radio or on, you know, like in my generation, it was we all grew up with like iPod Nanos, right? That was like the greatest thing. Or what, you know, I was like at the end of the Walkman generation, at the beginning of the iPod generation, and uh, listening to compressed MP3s on the way to school, you hear everything, but you don't feel the bass. You don't feel the impact that that low one can have. And then when you go to see a live concert, you feel music just as much as you hear it. You're like, wow, like the visceral experience of music is so so truly special, and that's why Crownlands has kind of prided itself as being a live band as much as we have. And the first concert I ever saw was the Smashing Pumpkins at
Oh
Massey
my
Hall.
lord,
I was
I'm
like, I,
so
I was like,
jealous.
oh, it was so good, man. So I was 14. I went with my sister, and that was the first time they played Bodies, I think, since like '95, I want to say, like at that show. And I think the Bodies was like my favorite song from Melancholy. And it was just, it just felt like so special, man. I think that was one of those anniversary tours. That was like a first time that Jimmy Chamberlain had come back on drums. James Iha wasn't there, Darcy wasn't there. But I mean, I don't know. Jimmy Chamberlain is one of my favorite drummers, man. Like just his left foot alone is like could lead an entire band, right? Just like that hi-hat always going throughout all the Pumpkin songs is so special to me. And yeah, that was a really good concert. And then like I think a couple days later I went to see Bob Dylan with my dad, and he was
Wow.
friends like he grew up with Paul James, this blues guitar player who ended up touring with Bo Diddley a lot throughout the 70s and 80s. And at that show, Paul was playing guitar with him. My dad it was just like this really special moment where, my dad got to see like his childhood friend ripping guitar with, Bob Dylan, who's my dad's like all-time hero, and it's become one of my all-time heroes, by extension. And so just based, like obviously two very different ends of the spectrum, but those are like the first two concerts I saw was, Dylan, who, admittedly, you go to a Dylan concert and you get like halfway through a song and you catch one phrase from a verse and you're like, oh, he's playing Tangle Up in Blue. I didn't realize it because he'll change the arrangement and the melody like just on the fly. And it's he will he does not honor the record the way that a lot of other artists do. And I kind of like that about Dylan. Whereas, the Pumpkins would kind of go um by rote of the record, and they'd reproduce like a studio recording nearly perfectly. And so it's cool to see like how artists approach their live show so differently, you know.
It's incredible. I mean, Siamese Dream is one of my favorite albums of all time.
Oh yeah, man, it's so good.
There's not a bad song on there, and they're one of the first bands I listened to. I remember having MTV2 and sitting there with my dad late at night and watching them, and I could stay up and watch it. And that's when they used to have really good music videos. And I remember seeing the video for Tonight Tonight, and it was like a theatre
Yeah,
production. And I was like, I miss the days when so much thought and time and budget went into a music video. And I know it's different now with the industry, but they used to be absolute masterpieces, like work of art. Even their videos for stuff like 1979, when they're just bumming around with like a big tire. It's just
yeah.
awesome videos. And I just,
Well, you can see that, Tonight Tonight was the lead video that, and then 1979 was at the end of the album cycle when they ran out of the budget and they're like, oh, what do we
definitely.
do? Grab the Super 8 cameras and just roll with it for a day, So it's but yeah, I love the Tonight Tonight music video, man. That made a huge impact on me. And all that kind of that the theatrical approach and like the artistic approach definitely kind of shines through in our music. Like I don't know if you've seen our music video for Context Fearless Part 1, but we kind of we really wanted to pull just as much from Lord of the Rings as much as um like Star Wars and Star Trek, and basically blending high fantasy with hard sci-fi. And we kind of like, we envisioned this world like hundreds of years in the future. And Cody and I basically play these interstellar musical delegates that bring music to this society that's been like kind of like eclipsed by war. And the world that we developed for that music video with the director Blake Moss, and we ended up kind of revisiting that cinematic world a few more times throughout like different songs like The Oracle and Starlifter, Fearless Part 2. So if you haven't seen that video and you're into the Pumpkins and you're into like that more like um, richer approach to music videos, you should check out Context for sure, dude.
You know I will. So, I mean, this is foundations you're building on here. Seeing Bob Dylan, the Pumpkins, some of those early albums you've listened to, they're such strong foundations to build upon. And I suppose at that point, talk to me like, what age was it you were like, I want to make a career out of music. I want to go out there and I want to be in a band, because I say this to everyone, I keep repeating myself, but I think it's so important. When you turn around to your parents and you say, Mom, Dad, I want to be in a band, or I'm going to go out there and I'm really going to make a name for myself in the music industry. It's like, okay, son, like, you're not going to be the next Kurt Cobain, like, get a proper job and then hopefully you can do this at the side. But was your family in full support, or were you just kind of like out to try and prove a point, or how did it all come about for you?
Yeah, good question, man. My parents were really supportive, and I think I I owe a lot of um, what success we've seen to my parents being really supportive and like understanding the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of the music industry. But there was basically a big clinching point where you know, at the end of high school, my parents were very encouraging, but they also they wanted me to go and have a backup plan, like most parents do, understandably. Because my sister is very responsible. She's very buttoned down. She's a couple years older than me, and she's actually in federal politics now, right? And so she is not on the partisan side, like in the administration side, and
Yeah.
she's crushing it. So she's very buttoned down, very responsible. And she's always led with her head, and I've always been more off the cuff and led with my heart. And so I decided I was going to go to university and study classical music. And in Canada, it's not as bad as the States for tuition costs, but it is significantly expensive, right? And it's kind of messed up where, you're looking at us like, am I going to go $100,000 into debt for a degree? And, you have to look at your education as an investment to get a job rather than a way to better yourself as a human being, which is a bit of a shame. But regardless, I decided I was going to go and get myself a fancy classic music degree. And so I went to university and I studied for a year. And I think I just read too much Jack Kerouac. And after a year, I dropped out and I hitchhiked from Toronto to Los Angeles. And it took me about a month. And my parents were actually kind of supportive because at first I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna take the summer off and I'm just gonna go to California and back. And my parents were very understanding, very supportive. And so I hitchhiked to LA, but the day I got there, I ended up meeting this reggae band in a music store. And we ended up getting to talking, and they needed a keyboard player to sit in with them at a gig that night. And so I sat in with them, and they liked me enough and they invited me back to their place, and I ended up crashing on their couch for like 6 months, and I played with these guys. We ended up playing the Whiskey a Go Go. We did a bunch of really cool gigs on the stage on Venice Beach. I remember, playing this band, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean multiple times. I was like, yep, this is it. This is, I've made it, so to speak. And that was just as important to my music education as actually going to school. And being able to sit in with the band and hear the singer call out the key of a song and having to just figure it out right then and there, just as much as sitting down and analyzing voice leading, for a chorale piece. And obviously, the downside of that though is in the States, you can only stay there for 6 months at a time if you don't have the proper work permits. And I did not. And so I ended up having to go back home for the holidays to figure out all of my paperwork, because the first thing I just want to do is go back and just keep working on music in California. Um, but as luck should have it, like a couple days after I got home, I met Cody, where a buddy of mine was auditioning for a band that Cody was playing drums in, and they were looking for a guitar player, and I didn't even play guitar at that point. I was a bass player and a keyboard player. But I crashed the audition and got along so well with Cody, and I ended up learning guitar to play in this band. And that band didn't end up working out, but Cody and I stayed in touch. And a couple of years later, we made Crownlands, and now we've just been at it for going on 8 years. So sometimes luck should have it. You chase you chase the muse and see where it takes you.
That's amazing. And 8 years, and it doesn't sound long, but it is still long in the way that some bands fizzle out after kind of 2 or 3 albums and find quite a. I think people don't anticipate how much work's involved, and with touring and
Yeah.
writing and going out there and all the travel and trying to have that work-life balance, especially if there's children involved or families and wives, etc. But you guys have been going 8 years, and it seems like you're more hungry than ever. It's not like you're getting fatigue or starting to, there's any cracks. You're kind of, I'm sure you've still got
Yeah,
all
I
these,
mean, I yeah,
huge.
yeah, definitely. I think it's just like the pandemic has, like, interrupted such a like that point, we were about to go on tour all across the world, and we had our debut record set to come out, and then ended up coming out throughout the pandemic, and so it kind of felt like we were starting at square one after so many years of like teeing up for the big international launch, and then it was like, oh, and then we had to pull back and regroup, which hurt us but also helped us because it allowed us to kind of make our White Buffalo record and this new record coming out called Fearless, which I think is like the best piece of music we've made so far. So it's like, um in a lot of ways it feels like we're just beginning, man. Obviously I know a lot of bands, their shelf life's only 5 6 years. I mean, look at the Beatles, man. They were only around for what, 7 years, and they basically changed the face of music. But I think we've taken it a lot slower. Also, just being a Canadian band means it's a much slower rise than you would see in the UK or the States, just by way of there's not a lot of people here, and the media is just so significantly different. But you know, yeah, we definitely are hungrier than ever, dude. Like we
I
just
love
want to
hearing
keep
that
going.
your new album is your favorite and the kind of your personal best work you're putting out. Like that's a good sign, isn't it?
Definitely, but it feels like our best work is still ahead of us. I feel like we've really found our voice, and we found like our niche audience as well, where we finally let our freak flag fly high on this record, where we're opening it up with an 18-minute space opera, um, which is something that our favorite bands were doing, like Close to the Edge by Yes or 2112 by Rush were like the, two of the biggest influences to that piece of music, I'd say. And so the fact that we're able to kind of um, carry that prog torch forward feels really, really good. Um, and I just want to keep doing that kind of stuff, of making music that I wanted to hear when I was 16 years old and discovering King Crimson and Genesis and all those guys, right? So um, modern music didn't really scratch that itch for me at that point. So I really want to be that band that might, capture the imaginations of a new generation of people who haven't really gotten into prog yet.
And I think it's strange because, you mentioned some great bands today and bands like Yes, one of my favorite tracks ever is Roundabout. I know it's one of their most
Yeah,
common tracks, but that just is a whole journey. Like it just blows my mind, all the signature and the time changes and everything else that goes with it. I just can't believe that's all one song. It's just absolutely unbelievable. But you mentioned Rush, and I was lucky enough to see them about 10 years ago. I still can't think of another band that blew my mind as much as those live. They were
yeah,
unbelievable. So to see how much you kind of put them in high regard and look up to, and they're kind of your inspiration,
yeah.
it doesn't
Not
get
just
much
as
better, does it?
Yeah, totally. Not just as musicians, but as people, right? They were able to remain close friends for over 40 years. And again, as you said, right, music industry is not easy place for people to like maintain friendships because you have to break down each other's egos and hurt each other's feelings on a daily basis in a band. You have to be like, great idea, not good enough. Let's
Yeah,
keep going. Like
yeah,
when you're
it's
writing
brutal.
music, or yeah, or just like I want, it's like in like little arguments, petty arguments that can add up. Like I want the record to be blue, I want it to be red, and I was like, oh, well, I see that we are not going to comfort. It's like little things like that can add up. So the fact that those guys were able to remain friends over such a long period of time is commendable, and that's something that Cody and I like look up to just as much as we do in the music. Is trying to maintain our friendship as much as being musical partners, which is it's not always easy, man.
I mean, having a dynamic of just two of you, at least it's not more personalities and more egos and more people to
Yeah,
try and compromise. So it's always two of you. And a band that I'm a massive fan of, and they've blown up in the UK on another level, is Royal Blood. Um,
yeah, those guys
and
are great.
absolutely awesome band. And I know it sounds really strange, but it doesn't feel like there's been that many two pieces over here in the UK that have blown up like that. I can't remember for years since a two piece has just come along and just
Hmm.
put on a performance that could headline a festival. And bands like Death from Above,
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
unbelievable. So I suppose at least there's only you and one other that you need to consider. So if there's going to be a fight, if it's red or blue, at least there's not a yellow and a green and an orange.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true, man. Yeah, I think the only issue is there's no tiebreaker, and so a lot of the time we bring our poor, long-suffering manager Ollie, who's also from Brighton, just like Royal Flood. He's he gets dragged into a lot of the tie breaking stuff, and I don't know if that's the best the course of action a lot of the time. But I mean, um, you know, poor man does a lot for us. So.
So what is it looking like now with obviously the pandemic out the way? I know that had a massive dent on something that can be so good, and you had this kind of progression and this kind of, this upward journey that kind of then gets put on pause, which fucking sucks for musicians. I was saying this to someone the other day. I think bands got hit harder than anyone because it's not like you could do your job from home. It's not like you could just
Yeah.
tour in your bedroom. I take it now
But
you're
well,
just wanting to get out there and gig and do
yeah,
as much as you can to make up for lost time.
we want to, but again, the world has changed so much, Mark. Like, it's just so much more expensive to tour
Yeah.
than it was, and so it's like our guarantees, or the money we get from a show have not gone up two or three times, but our costs have. And it was barely we were barely breaking even up, beforehand. So looking at our touring right now, as fun as it can be, it's so expensive. So, like touring, which used to be the only way a musician could make money, we're seeing that most musicians are in fact losing money on tour over the last year or so. So I think we're seeing a lot of bands canceling their tours, not because of COVID, but just because they're looking at like gas, hotel, crew wages, food, and it's like no, like it doesn't work, right? And so in fact, we've had a couple moments where our team has taken us aside and been like, you guys are going to lose ten or $20,000 on this tour. You should probably not do it. And then it's like that old school saying of like, well, gotta get out there and meet the people and play the songs. And like if those songs were good enough to record, they just get better and better and better as you play them live, right? Like night after night, you find little new intricacies and they take on a whole new life after you've played a song like 100 times on a tour. And so this tour we're doing right now, we're going across Canada and we're losing money on that tour, but not as much as we would if we were doing a UK tour or an American tour. So I think that right now we're only seeing like the upper echelon of bands being able to tour really and make money, right? Bands that like are seeing that like once you get into arena status the margins open up a little bit, but for us when we're doing like 500 cap clubs or 1,000 cap theaters kind of thing, right? We're doing fairly small rooms, and right now those margins just mean like we're just going out and hemorrhaging money. uh but at the end of the day you have to look at it as an investment, right? And it's like again starting at square one, where if you open up a small business you lose money the first 5 years or so, right? Your margins don't go into the black until 5, 6 years in, and because of COVID, we're basically starting again at square one, at least financially speaking. So it can be intimidating. Obviously, luckily, festivals, pay us a bit more, so we can kind of make up the difference on the back end later on in the year. But it's scary, man. Like
It's
it's
not the dream,
definitely.
is it, that everyone kind of sees? And I think some people that aren't in the industry or are in a band that are just starting out, it isn't like it used to be. You're not going to be millionaires from selling millions of records and people queuing up
Mm-mm.
outside to get a signed vinyl. It's just so ruthless out there. And over in the UK at the moment, there's a bit of talk because, venues are taking quite a lot from the merch.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
a great band, Gajira, are getting criticized because they're charging £40 for a T-shirt, but it's like they have to get a whole crew over here. They have to pay all the
yeah.
riders, all the crew that go along, the sound desk, the engineer, all the staff, and it's like, and they're probably not even seeing that much profit from that. But it's
No,
not it's not
the
this
artist
star
is.
life, is it?
No, I think that's a good point where it's like the artist is usually the one to take the brunt for that, and the artist is expected to take the loss. And it's like, well, I'm a fan, so I don't want to pay the 40, quid for the shirt. What can't you, help me out because I want to support you? And it's like, well, the artist is always going to be the one to kind of take the brunt, it seems. And that's the reality of the world we're in. The music industry is a perfect microcosm of capitalism at a whole, man. It's, the artist is the only one creating the content that is being sold, and the artist is the last one to get paid, very much like the worker who produces the goods makes the least amount of money. So it's just the reality that we live in. And I think we are seeing artists be able to have a bit more control of that. We're seeing a shift in, like, direct to consumer sales, where we run our own merch store, and that's really the only way we see money,
Yeah.
is from merch sales. And so um and a lot of the time, yeah, when you're playing a show, the venue or the promoter is taking 20% gross from your merch sales. And that's not factoring in management commissions that you have to factor in as well. And you have to factor in the cost of producing the goods, and a lot of the time the cost of shipping the goods, and then shipping the goods a second or third time because it didn't get to the right venue on time because of the logistical nightmare that we're in a post-COVID world where the entire world has shifted into shipped goods, right? Look at like basically overnight 2 years ago, we went from going to the store buying something to ordering everything online,
It's
right?
so
So
true.
the poor shipping people are like way overworked, and so most of the time, if you're shipping 40 boxes worth of t-shirts, the 40 boxes are not going to all arrive at the same place at the same time that you need them to, right? So uh it's crazy, man. Our last US tour, we just had this like ongoing thing, just like with like this kick drum head. We called it the cursed kick drum head. And it's like, and we had a box of records, that it would get to the venue that we played like the night before, and it was just like we kept leapfrogging these records that just ended up just like they never made it to a venue, so we were never able
It's
to sell them.
insane.
And it's like, and again, like, we were doing everything right. It's just the reality of the world is overnight shipping is no longer overnight.
My final question for you today, and I ask this to everyone that comes on the podcast, is I allow the artist that comes on to choose the final piece of music that's played on the episode. So it can be any band by, sorry, any piece of music or any song by any band, but something that means a lot to you. And I think that keeps the episodes quite fresh and original because everyone chooses something different. But
Hmm.
what's a song that you love that after today's episode is edited and out there for the world to listen to, you want to be
Wow, that's
played that means something to you? And bands find it hard, I'm putting a time limit on for you, but one song that really, really means a lot to you that when I asked the question maybe came to your head and heart first.
probably Xanadu by Rush, man.
Yeah,
That song changed my life. Like when I was 14, that's the first time. Like, to me, that's magic. Truly magical. It transports you to a different time and place, truly. And that song's the reason why I'm playing music for a living.
that's a hell of a good reason. And we've talked about Rush a lot today, but even though they're huge, even though they've sold out arenas, even so, they're probably millionaires, they always seem humble. They always seem like nice people, and you never hear shit
Yeah.
about them. So that's a good blueprint to be if you're going to be in a band.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And like that song's the first time I registered what a synthesizer was, right? It opens up with like
Yeah,
that Taurus, drone, and it's got all the wood blocks outside and the birds chirping, and it's just, that was the first time I'd really heard music that sounded so open. And yeah, it's just such a special piece of music, man.
I really appreciate your time coming on the podcast today, and I really hope that something in the world changes that allows you to come to the UK. I know you came, I think, was
Yeah,
it
man.
last year to London for a one-off show?
Yeah. Yeah, we
But
did we did a few shows there. We did like
yeah,
was the Great Escape. We did at that in Brighton. We did a few shows for that. And then yeah, we did the Omira in London, and that was a great show, man. A bunch of our gear just, did not like the English power. A lot of stuff was going on. I think I blew up two of my amps. at that show. It was totally worth it. That was a lot of fun. So hopefully next time I'll only be playing English amplifiers when next time we're over there.
But don't leave it too long. It'd be awesome to have a beer with you, meet you in the flesh. I really hope things change, that people, because otherwise bands just are going to stop coming over here and that'll just suck. So
Oh yeah, like we love it over there, man. It just feels it felt like we really arrived there where the kind of music we play is not as accepted and celebrated, I guess, in Canada is the way, but going over there and talking to people, everyone had like King Crimson shirts, Genesis shirts, and we're talking about Fripp. We're talking about, where Peter Gabriel grew up. And it just felt like it was like it's the mecca of the music that inspires us so much. And so it felt really, really special to be there. So hopefully we'll get there, very soon. If not this year, definitely next year. Again, just figuring out budgets and trying to make it work financially and, get over there and not lose our shirts is the biggest thing.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. I've really enjoyed this chat, and you're more than welcome whenever you want to come back on. I feel like we could talk for hours, if I'm honest.
Yeah, man, me too. It's really nice to talk to you, Mark.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and the amazing Kevin from the awesome band Crownlands. Like I said at the start of today's interview, I really hope by the end of today's interview, you guys are all now like, do you know what? I'm going to go and listen to them. Please do. They will blow your mind and easily be one of your favourite bands, and probably one of your dad's favourite bands, because they sound from that era, like I said, like bands like Led Zeppelin and the incredible Rush. And truly, I really don't think there'll be anyone out there that doesn't absolutely admire, respect and adore this band. Listen to the album Fearless, then go and listen to Live at White Sands, that will blow your mind, and then spend a whole night on YouTube watching all their live videos. It's the best way you can spend an evening. Pull yourself a whiskey and you will not regret it. And do you know what? If you go and check them out and you love them, please go on markandme.com and let me know. I love it when I suggest a book or a band or a film to someone through this podcast. You go and check it out and you fall in love like I do. That's the best compliment this podcast can get. You know what to do by now. If you've enjoyed today's episode, go on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and share. Hit the retweet button, hit the share button, put it as your story on Instagram. All the links are on markandme.com, and honestly, it goes a really, really long way. Also, if you really want to go that extra mile for Mark and Me, I have a Patreon account. Each and every month, I give exclusive episodes just for you guys out there who support me on there. Also, I give you some stickers, badges, and basically try and do a newsletter as often as I can. And I'm working really hard behind the scenes to make patrons feel really loved, really special. And honestly, please keep supporting me on there. It goes so far. This week as well on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or whatever it's called this week, you can go on there and you can subscribe to the podcast. It's $3.99 a month. That is nothing. You can't even get a Big Mac meal for that. You can't. You genuinely can't. So for that, you're going to get 2 episodes every week. You're going to get exclusive episodes as well, like the Patreon people. And it really goes a long way. And I've made it so easy on Apple. You just hit the subscribe button and they'll take $3.99. Please, all that support goes right back into the podcast. I don't make any money off this. You should know that by now. I do it for the love of the podcast and it will always remain that way. And what I'll do with that money is go and travel the country, go to festivals over the summer. You may have seen this week I'm announced at 2000 Trees, Slam Dunk, and so much more. And this will allow me to record more interviews for you guys at home, so it's win-win. But I can't do it without your support. I'll be back, hopefully, if I don't go back into hospital, with a brand new episode in only a few days' time. So until then, look after yourself, listen to Crownlands, and I'll speak to you all very soon.
stand within the pleasure dome.